It took Ilhan Omar exactly 12 words to learn why you should never mock a constitutional lawyer's faith. Christian nationalist from Louisiana who can't understand complex perspectives. 12 words. That's all it took. 12 words spoken with such casual dismissiveness, such reflexive contempt for American Christianity, such absolute certainty that faith and patriotism are weaknesses rather than strengths. 12 words that would trigger one of the most powerful displays of moral authority in congressional history. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint the picture because the setting matters. It was a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing titled American Values and Foreign Policy in a Changing World. The kind of hearing that usually generates some interest from policy wonks and international relations experts. But this one was different. Ilhan Omar was testifying, and whenever she testified, controversy followed. The room was packed. Progressive activists on one side, conservative groups on the other, international media lining the walls, cameras capturing every angle. Omar sat at the witness table looking confident, almost defiant. She wore a bright hijab and a bold-colored blazer, her expression a mixture of practiced earnestness and barely concealed contempt for those who questioned her. She'd been testifying for about 45 minutes about her views on Israeli-Palestinian relations, American engagement with Somalia, and the need for a more nuanced approach to foreign policy that recognized diverse perspectives. Then it was Speaker Mike Johnson's turn to question her. Johnson sat at the committee bench. Technically, he didn't need to be there as Speaker, but he'd maintained his committee assignments and occasionally participated when issues were particularly important. He looked exactly like what he was, a soft-spoken constitutional lawyer and devout Christian from Louisiana. Conservative suit, American flag pin, wire-rimmed glasses, an open Bible on the desk beside his papers. The kind of person who radiates quiet conviction rather than bombast. "Congresswoman Omar," Johnson began, his Louisiana accent gentle and polite. "Thank you for your testimony today. I want to ask you about a statement you made in July 2019 when speaking to Somali American constituents in Minnesota. You told the audience, in Somali, and we had it professionally translated, that we are people who know they are Somali and Muslim first. Could you clarify what you meant by that? Because it raises questions about where your primary loyalty lies when you're serving as a member of the United States Congress." It was a reasonable question, a fair question, the kind of question that any representative who'd made such a statement should be prepared to answer. Omar smiled. Not a friendly smile, a condescending smile. The smile of someone who thinks they're about to deliver a devastating put-down to someone they consider intellectually and morally inferior. "Mr. Speaker," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "perhaps a Christian nationalist from Louisiana who's never left America and can't understand complex, multicultural perspectives shouldn't be questioning the loyalty of those of us who actually bring international experience and diverse viewpoints to foreign policy discussions. Some of us understand nuance. Some of us understand that identity is complex. Maybe that's beyond your understanding." The room went absolutely silent. Even her progressive supporters looked uncomfortable. You don't mock the Speaker of the House in a congressional hearing. You don't attack someone's faith. You don't dismiss someone based on where they're from. And you definitely don't question someone's ability to understand complexity while refusing to answer a direct question about your own loyalty. Johnson set down his pen very carefully. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth from his pocket, put them back on. He looked at Omar for a long moment, his expression unchanged, still calm, still polite, still radiating that gentle Southern grace. But anyone who knew him recognized what was happening. She'd just made a catastrophic tactical error. He picked up the Bible that sat beside his papers, held it for a moment, then set it back down. "Well, Congresswoman," he said, his voice still mild and Southern polite, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I appreciate you sharing your perspective on my faith and background. You're right about several things. I am a Christian. Proudly. I am from Louisiana. Proudly. I have traveled internationally, but you're correct that I've never lived in another country. I've only ever been American. I've only ever sworn allegiance to one flag, one constitution, one nation under God." He paused, that gentle smile appearing. "But since you've brought up faith, patriotism, and understanding complex issues, perhaps we can discuss your record on all three. Because I have some questions about your marriages and whether you committed immigration fraud. I have questions about your campaign finances and the millions you've paid to your husband's company. I have questions about your statements minimizing 9/11 and using anti-Semitic language. I have questions about whether you're Somali first or American first. And I have questions about whether someone who's possibly committed multiple federal crimes should be lecturing anyone about understanding complexity." Johnson opened a thick folder. "You see, Congresswoman, you mocked my Christian faith. You dismissed my Louisiana background. You suggested I can't understand nuance. So let me show you what this Christian from Louisiana understands. I understand accountability. I understand truth. I understand loyalty. And I understand when someone is fundamentally unfit to represent Americans in Congress. So, shall we begin? Because I've got documentation, I've got questions, and I've got 2 hours. And unlike you, I'm going to answer every question clearly, with evidence, and without hiding behind accusations of bigotry." He looked directly at her, his expression still gentle, but his words carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "Let's have a conversation about faith, loyalty, and truth. You can teach me about complex perspectives, and I'll share what Christian Americans believe about honesty, integrity, and serving the country that saved your life." The room was electric. Every reporter alert, every camera focused, Omar's confident expression starting to crack, the progressive activists looking worried, and Mike Johnson, the soft-spoken Christian constitutional lawyer from Louisiana, opened his folder and began what would become known as the faith and the fraud. Johnson organized his papers with the deliberate care of someone who'd spent 20 years as a trial lawyer. His demeanor remained calm, almost pastoral, but there was something methodical about his preparation that suggested this wasn't going to be a theological debate. This was going to be a documented evisceration. "Congresswoman, you mentioned I can't understand complex perspectives. Perhaps you're right. I'm just a simple Christian from Louisiana. So help me understand something that truly confuses me: your marital history. Because as a Christian who believes in the sanctity of marriage, I find your situation deeply troubling." He pulled out the first set of documents, had them displayed on the screens around the hearing room. "In 2002, you entered into a faith-based marriage with Ahmed Hirsi. According to Islamic tradition, 2 beautiful children were born from that union. In 2008, you separated from Mr. Hirsi. Then, in 2009, you legally married Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Now, this is where things become complex, to use your word." Johnson pulled out more documents: birth records, immigration papers, community testimonies. Multiple credible sources, including birth records from Somalia, immigration documents filed with the U.S. government, school records from Minneapolis, and testimony from members of your own Somali American community indicate that Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi is your biological brother. Same father listed on birth certificates. Nur Said Elmi Mohammed. Immigration records showing both of you entering the United States as part of the same family unit. School records showing you living in the same household during your teenage years. He looked up from the documents, his expression genuinely puzzled. Now, you've called these allegations disgusting lies, conspiracy theories, and Islamophobic smears. But here's what you haven't done, Congresswoman. You haven't provided any evidence that Ahmed Nur Said Elmi is not your brother. You haven't explained why you married him. You haven't addressed any of the actual documentary evidence. You've just attacked the people asking the questions and accused them of bigotry. Johnson pulled out Minnesota state documents. But let's set aside the brother allegations for a moment. Let's focus on what's absolutely, unquestionably documented by the state of Minnesota. While you were legally married to Ahmed Nur Said Elmi from 2009 to 2017, you filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi. Not alleged, not rumored, documented, and confirmed by Minnesota tax authorities. You filed as married to one man while legally married to another man. He let that hang in the air. That's tax fraud, Congresswoman. The state of Minnesota confirmed it. You paid back taxes. You paid penalties. This isn't a complex perspective. It's a crime. Johnson leaned forward, his voice remaining gentle but firm. So, let me lay out the situation clearly, because it's actually not that complex. If Ahmed Nur Said Elmi is your brother, then you committed immigration fraud by marrying him to obtain immigration benefits for him. That's a federal felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. If he's not your brother, then the only logical explanation for why you would marry him while living with and filing taxes with a different man is still immigration fraud. Different details, same federal crime. He pulled out a timeline, displayed it on screen. And notice the timing. You divorced Elmi in 2017, right before announcing your run for Congress. Almost like you were cleaning up legal issues before entering public life. Interesting coincidence. Johnson's voice took on a pastoral quality, the tone of a minister addressing moral issues from the pulpit. Congresswoman, you mocked my Christian faith just a few minutes ago. You called me a Christian nationalist, as if following Christ and loving America are somehow wrong. So, let me speak as a Christian about what we believe regarding marriage. He picked up his Bible, opened it. Hebrews 13:4 says, "Let marriage be held in honor among all." 1 Corinthians 7 discusses the sanctity of the marriage covenant. Throughout Scripture, marriage is treated as holy, as sacred, as something that reflects God's relationship with His people. It's not a tool for fraud. It's not a convenience for immigration benefits. It's not something you use and discard when it's no longer useful. Johnson set down the Bible. If you committed marriage fraud, whether with your brother or with anyone else, that's not just illegal under American law. As a Christian, I believe it's a violation of something holy. It's using a sacred institution for personal gain. It's lying before God and man. He gathered the documents. So here are your options, Congresswoman. You married your brother for immigration fraud. You married someone else for immigration fraud. Or you're so confused or dishonest about your marital status that you committed tax fraud by filing with the wrong person. Those are your 3 options. Choose one. Explain it clearly. Or admit that you can't answer because the truth is incriminating. Johnson looked directly at her, his expression still gentle but his words devastating. You mocked my Christian values. You mocked my American background. But in Christian America, and despite what you may think, this is still a Christian nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles. We don't commit marriage fraud. We don't lie on our tax returns. We don't use the sacred institution of marriage as a tool for immigration fraud. And we don't hide behind accusations of bigotry when asked legitimate questions about potential federal crimes. He paused. Let that sink in. Maybe in Somalia these things are handled differently. But you're not in Somalia. You're in America. You're representing Americans. You took an oath to uphold American laws. And Americans deserve to know if their representative is a federal criminal. Omar tried to respond, stammering something about racist attacks and Islamophobia. Johnson held up a hand. Congresswoman, I've cited official birth records, immigration documents, Minnesota state findings on your tax fraud, and basic timeline facts. If presenting documented evidence of potential crimes is Islamophobic, then reality has an Islamophobia problem. Now, would you like to answer the question, or shall we move on to your next failure? He didn't wait for an answer. Let's discuss something that every American remembers clearly. September 11th, 2001, because your perspective on that day reveals a lot about your loyalty to America. Johnson's expression became more serious now, the gentle pastoral quality giving way to something harder, more intense. This wasn't about legal technicalities anymore. This was about American lives, American tragedy, and where someone's loyalties truly lie. Congresswoman, you said I can't understand complex perspectives because I'm a Christian from Louisiana who's never lived anywhere else. Let me tell you about a day that every American understands with perfect clarity, regardless of where they're from or what their faith is. September 11th, 2001. Do you remember that day? He didn't wait for her to respond. I remember exactly where I was. I was in my law office in Louisiana. I watched the towers fall on television. I watched people jump from buildings rather than burn alive. I watched the Pentagon burn. I watched a field in Pennsylvania where heroes fought back. I remember every moment. Do you? Johnson pulled out a transcript, his hands steady. March 23, 2019. You gave a speech to the Council on American-Islamic Relations. You said, and I'm reading your exact words from the official transcript, KIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. He set down the transcript, looked up. Some people did something. That's how you describe the worst terrorist attack in American history. Some people did something. Not terrorists. Not Islamic extremists. Not murderers who killed 2,007 innocent Americans. Some people did something. Johnson's voice remained controlled, but the emotion underneath was unmistakable. Let me tell you what some people actually did. On September 11th, 2001, 19 Islamic terrorists affiliated with Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 American commercial aircraft. They deliberately flew American Airlines Flight 11 into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. They deliberately flew United Airlines Flight 175 into the South Tower. They deliberately flew American Airlines Flight 7 into the Pentagon. They tried to fly United Airlines Flight 93 into the Capitol or the White House, but passengers fought back and the plane crashed in a Pennsylvania field instead. He pulled out photos, the towers burning, people at the windows, the collapse, the aftermath, and displayed them on screen. Those some people murdered 2,977 Americans that day. They burned people alive in office buildings. They forced people to make an impossible choice between burning to death or jumping 90 stories. They murdered firefighters running into buildings to save people. They murdered police officers. They murdered office workers, traders, janitors, bumpers, tourists, pilots, flight attendants. They murdered people for the crime of being American." Johnson's pace increased slightly, his words carrying more weight. "Captain Patrick Brown, FDNY Ladder 3, father of 3 children. He ran into the South Tower when everyone else was running out. The building collapsed on him. Some person killed him. Wells Crowther, the man in the red bandana, 24 years old. He saved dozens of people by leading them to safety, going back into the burning tower again and again. He died when it collapsed. Some person killed him. Todd Beamer, Flight 93. Let's roll. He led the passenger revolt that crashed the plane in a field instead of into the Capitol. Some person killed him." Johnson pulled out a book, held it up. "This contains all 2,977 names. Every single American murdered that day. I could read every name. It would take hours. But we don't have time, because there are too many. Too many Americans murdered by some people who did something. Except they weren't some people, Congresswoman. They were Islamic terrorists. 19 men who pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. They weren't anonymous. They weren't generic. They were Islamic extremists who murdered Americans in the name of jihad." He set down the book, looked directly at her. "Can you say that right now? Can you say Islamic terrorists murdered 2,977 Americans on September 11, 2001, and it was evil, and I condemn it without reservation? Can you say that clearly, unequivocally, without immediately pivoting to talk about Islamophobia or American foreign policy or civil liberties?" Silence. Omar refused to answer, her expression a mixture of defiance and discomfort. "You can't, can you?" Johnson said quietly. "And that's the problem. You've never been able to clearly, unambiguously condemn Islamic terrorism. Ever. Let me show you the pattern." He pulled out more documents, his delivery becoming more rapid, more intense. "You opposed designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, even though the Brotherhood has direct ties to Hamas and has been involved in terrorism across the Middle East. You're the only member of Congress who voted against a resolution recognizing the Armenian genocide. 1.5 million Christians systematically murdered by the Ottoman Empire. And you voted against it because Turkey, a Muslim nation, opposed the recognition. You've consistently voted against counterterrorism measures. You've compared Israel defending itself from terrorist rocket attacks to terrorism itself." Johnson pulled out video footage, played it on screen. "This is you in July 2019, speaking to a Somali-American audience in Minnesota. You're speaking in Somali. You probably thought most Americans wouldn't bother to get it translated. But we did. Professional translation. You said, 'We are people who know they are Somali and Muslim first.'" He paused, let that statement hang in the air, repeated it slowly. "Somali and Muslim first, not American. You told your supporters that their primary identity, their primary loyalty is to Somalia and Islam, not to the United States of America. Not to the country that took you in as a refugee from a failed state, that saved your life, that gave you education, opportunity, and a seat in Congress." Johnson stood now, his voice rising with controlled passion, the words of a Christian who's watched someone mock both his faith and his country. "So, let me think about your complex perspective, Congresswoman. You minimize the murder of 2,977 Americans to some people did something. You can't clearly condemn Islamic terrorism without hedging and deflecting. You oppose recognizing genocide when it offends Muslim nations. You vote against American counterterrorism efforts. You compare Israel defending itself to terrorism. You told Somali Americans that you are Somali and Muslim first, not American. And when I, an American Christian who loves his country, question where your loyalties lie, you call me a nationalist who can't understand complexity. His voice became firmer, more authoritative. Congresswoman, I am a Christian. My faith is the foundation of who I am. I believe Jesus Christ is Lord. I believe the Bible is God's Word. I try to live according to Christian principles of love, truth, and righteousness. But you know what else my Christian faith teaches me? It teaches me about loyalty, about keeping oaths, about honoring the country God has placed me in. Johnson picked up his Bible again, opened it. Romans 13 says that government authorities are established by God, and that we should submit to them. 1 Peter 2:17 says, honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. Christians are called to be good citizens, to honor our nation, to obey our laws, to serve our communities. My Christian faith makes me a better American, not a worse one. He set down the Bible, looked directly at her. You mocked me for being a Christian nationalist. Here's what I believe. I'm Christian first in my personal life. My faith shapes my values, my morality, my worldview. But when I serve in Congress, when I vote, when I make decisions, I ask one question. What's best for America? What serves American interests? What protects American lives? My loyalty in public service is clear. America first. Johnson's voice rose with conviction. But you told Somali audiences you're Somali and Muslim first. You minimize American tragedies. You can't condemn Islamic terrorism. You vote against American interests. You oppose American allies. And when questioned about your divided loyalty, you claim victimhood and mock us for being Christian and American. He walked toward her position. You came to America as a refugee. You were in a refugee camp in Kenya. Somalia was a failed state torn apart by Islamic extremism and tribal warfare. America took you in. We saved your life. We gave you safety, education, opportunity. We gave you a chance to build a life. We gave you a seat in Congress. And this is how you repay us. By minimizing our greatest tragedy. By telling your supporters you're Somali first. By mocking Americans who love their country and their faith. Johnson returned to his seat, his voice becoming quieter but more devastating. Congresswoman, I'm a Christian. I believe in forgiveness. I believe in redemption. I believe in second chances. But I also believe in accountability. I believe in truth. And I believe that when you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, you need to actually mean it. You need to actually put America first. He looked into the camera. If you remember where you were on September 11th, if those 2,977 Americans matter to you, if you think some people did something is a disgrace and an insult to their memory, if you believe members of Congress should be American first, share this everywhere. Make sure everyone knows. Johnson turned back to Omar. But Congresswoman, since you called me a Christian nationalist who can't understand complexity, let me address another complex issue, your use of anti-Semitic language and your hatred of Israel. Because, as a Christian, I have some thoughts about that. Johnson's expression shifted, less confrontational now, more sorrowful. This was a Christian witnessing against hatred, speaking from conviction rather than anger. Congresswoman, you mocked me for being a Christian from Louisiana. You called me a Christian nationalist. So, Let me speak as a Christian about something that troubles me deeply. Your statements about Jewish people and the state of Israel. He pulled out a series of tweets, displayed them enlarged on the hearing room screens. February 10th, 2019. Someone asks why you think politicians support Israel. You respond, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby," with a music note emoji. When pressed about who you think is paying, you reply, "AIPAC." Johnson looked up from the tweet. That's the ancient anti-Semitic trope that Jews control politics through money. That American politicians only support Israel because they're being bribed. This is the same lie that's been used to justify Jewish persecution for literally thousands of years. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fraudulent anti-Semitic text from the early 1900s, claimed Jews secretly controlled world governments through money. The Nazis used this lie to justify the Holocaust, and you invoked it on Twitter. He pulled out another tweet. March 3rd, 2019. You tweet about allegiance to a foreign country, suggesting that supporters of Israel have dual loyalty, that they can't be trusted to put America first. This is another ancient anti-Semitic trope. Jews have been accused of dual loyalty for centuries. It was used to justify the Dreyfus affair in France. It was used by Stalin to purge Jews from Soviet government. It was used by Hitler. And you used it casually on social media. Johnson pulled out an older tweet. November 16th, 2012. Before you were in Congress, you tweeted, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." Hypnotized the world. The idea that Jews have mystical, demonic powers to control and deceive people. This is medieval blood libel. The lie that Jews are in league with dark forces, that they use supernatural means to manipulate the world. This belief justified pogroms, expulsions, and massacres, and you propagated it. Johnson set down the tweets, his voice taking on a different quality, not accusatory now, but educational, pastoral. Congresswoman, you mocked my Christian faith. So let me speak as a Christian about why these statements are so deeply wrong. My faith is rooted in Judaism. Jesus was Jewish. He was born a Jew, lived as a Jew, died as a Jew, and rose again as a Jew. The apostles were Jewish. The early church was Jewish. The Bible I carry is a Jewish book. The Old Testament is Jewish scripture, and the New Testament was written by Jews. He picked up his Bible, held it. In Genesis 12:3, God says to Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." That's a promise. That's a covenant. God says he will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel. As a Christian who believes the Bible is God's word, I take that seriously. Johnson's voice strengthened with conviction. I don't support Israel blindly. I can criticize Israeli policy when it's wrong. I can disagree with Israeli government decisions. But I will never use the language of ancient hatred. I will never invoke blood libel. I will never suggest that Jews control the world with money or have mystical powers to hypnotize people. I will never question the loyalty of American Jews who support Israel. He pulled out hate crime statistics. Since you took office in January 2019, anti-Semitic incidents in America have increased by 61%. Synagogue shootings in Pittsburgh and Poway, Jewish cemeteries vandalized across the country, Jews attacked on the streets of New York for wearing kippahs or traditional Orthodox clothing, swastikas spray-painted on Jewish businesses. You didn't personally pull any triggers or spray-paint any swastikas, but when a member of Congress normalizes anti-Semitic language, when you mainstream these ancient hatreds and make them acceptable in political discourse, You create an environment where bigotry flourishes. Johnson pulled out a congressional resolution, held it up. Your own party was so embarrassed by your anti-Semitism that the House had to pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism without naming you directly. The Democratic-controlled House felt compelled to publicly rebuke one of their own members because your statements were so obviously bigoted. And how did you respond? By claiming victimhood. By saying you were being attacked for being Muslim? His voice rose with moral authority. No, Congresswoman. You're not being attacked for being Muslim. I defend religious freedom for Muslims. I oppose actual Islamophobia. I've stood against discrimination against Muslim Americans. This isn't about your religion. This is about your bigotry. This is about you using language that for 2,000 years has been used to justify the persecution, expulsion, and murder of Jewish people. Johnson pulled out her voting record. And let's examine your actions, not just your words. You support BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. You want to economically strangle the only democracy in the Middle East, the only country in the region where Muslims, Christians, Jews, Druze, Baha'i, and atheists all have equal rights under law. The only country with freedom of speech, freedom of the press, free elections, an independent judiciary, gay rights, women's rights. You want to boycott that country? He flipped through pages of voting records. Meanwhile, you're silent on China's genocide of Uyghur Muslims, silent on Iran hanging homosexuals from cranes, silent on Saudi Arabia's oppression of women, silent on Syria's use of chemical weapons, silent on Hamas using Palestinian children as human shields, silent on the Palestinian Authority paying salaries to the families of terrorists, the only country you consistently attack, the only country you want to economically destroy, the only country you compare to terrorists, is the Jewish state. Johnson's voice filled with righteous anger. Now you want me to believe that's just criticism of Israeli policy, that it's just about human rights? Then why is it the only country you target? Why do you ignore actual genocides, actual oppression, actual human rights catastrophes in Muslim countries, while obsessively attacking the one Jewish state? The answer is obvious to anyone paying attention. It's anti-Semitism. He walked toward her position, speaking with the moral authority of someone who genuinely believes he's witnessing against evil. Congresswoman, you mocked my Christian faith. You called me a Christian nationalist. Here's what my faith teaches me about hatred. It's sin. Anti-Semitism is sin. Using language that led to the Holocaust is evil. Standing with those who want to destroy Israel is aligning yourself against God's people. Johnson's voice became passionate. As a Christian, I stand with Israel. I stand with the Jewish people, not because I agree with every Israeli policy. I don't. Not because Israel is perfect. No nation is. But because I believe God's promises. Because I believe the Bible. Because I believe that standing against anti-Semitism is a moral imperative. And because I believe that when someone uses the same language that justified the Holocaust, they must be opposed. He returned to his seat, gathered his papers. You've made American Jews less safe. You've normalized anti-Semitic tropes. You've given aid and comfort to those who hate Israel and want to see her destroyed. Your own party had to rebuke you, and when held accountable, you claim victimhood and mock the faith of those who stand against your hatred. Johnson looked into the camera. If you stand with Israel, if you stand against anti-Semitism, if you believe that hatred is hatred regardless of who expresses it or what faith they claim, if you think a member of Congress who uses anti-Semitic language is unfit to serve, Share this widely." He turned back to Omar. "But let's discuss another aspect of your record. You mocked my church background. So, let me apply Christian principles of stewardship to your campaign finances. Because what you've done with donor money is both illegal and immoral." Johnson pulled out a new section of his folder. These documents marked with red tabs. His expression returned to that pastoral quality. A minister addressing moral failure. Disappointed, but determined to speak truth. "Congresswoman, you mocked my church background earlier. You seem to think that managing church budgets was beneath you, that it showed a lack of sophistication. So, let me apply Christian principles of financial stewardship to your campaign finances. Because in church, we take stewardship very seriously." He opened the first document, displayed it on screen. "Your husband, Tim Minot. He runs a political consulting firm called the E Street Group. Over the past 4 years, your campaign has paid his firm $2,876,000. Let me write that out so we can all see it clearly. $2,876,000 from your campaign to your husband's company." Johnson let that number hang in the air. "Now, in church, when we manage finances, we ask basic questions. What are we paying for? What did we receive? Can we document the value?" So I asked those questions about the payments to your husband's firm. I reviewed the FEC filings. They list consulting services, digital services, travel arrangements, fundraising consulting. Very vague, very general. So I had my staff research what the E Street Group actually delivered for $2.8 million. He flipped through pages. We couldn't find anything. No portfolio of work, no case studies, no documented deliverables, no testimonials from any clients except your campaign. Just $2.8 million in payments to your husband for services that nobody can actually identify or verify. In church, we'd call that embezzlement. What do you call it? Johnson pulled out House Ethics Committee reports. But I'm not the only one who noticed this. The House Ethics Committee, your colleagues, your own party, investigated your campaign finances. They found that you likely violated House rules by using campaign funds for personal benefit. Very diplomatic language, very gentle. But the finding was clear. You improperly used campaign money to enrich your family. He read from the committee report. The committee expressed concern that payments to the E Street Group may constitute personal use of campaign funds because they primarily benefited you and your husband rather than the campaign. The recommended penalty? You paid a $3,069 fine. Let me do the math here. Let me do the, you made $2,176,000 in questionable payments to your husband's company. You were found to have likely violated ethics rules, and you settled by paying $3,469. Johnson looked up, his expression one of disbelief. That's 4.1% of the payments in question. That's not accountability. That's a parking ticket for bank robbery. That's a slap on the wrist for behavior that would get regular Americans investigated for fraud. He pulled out additional campaign expenditure reports. But let's look at how your campaign spends money more broadly, because it's quite revealing. Luxury hotels, $124,000 over 2 years. Strategy meetings at 5-star resorts. First-class airfare, $89,000 in 1 year, when Coach would have worked fine. High-end restaurants. Campaign finance reports show a team dinner at Per Se in New York. $1,147 for one meal. That's a restaurant where the tasting menu costs $350 per person before wine. Johnson's voice took on that pastoral quality again. You see, Congresswoman, in church we teach something called stewardship. It comes from the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. God gives us resources, money, time, abilities, and we're accountable for how we use them. We don't own these resources. We're stewards of them. We use them wisely for good purposes, not for personal enrichment or luxury. He picked up his Bible, opened to a marked page. 1 Timothy 3:3 says that church leaders must not be lovers of money. Acts 20:35 says, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Proverbs 11:1 says, "The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him." Luke 16:10 says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." Johnson set down the Bible, looked directly at her. "You turned your campaign into a family enrichment scheme. You paid your husband millions for undocumented work. You lived luxuriously on campaign funds, five-star hotels, first-class flights, expensive dinners. When caught by your own party's ethics committee, you paid a meaningless fine and continued the same behavior. You've paid his firm an additional $600,000 since the ethics investigation closed." His voice grew firmer. "That's not stewardship, Congresswoman. That's corruption. That's using donor money, money from people who believed in you, who thought they were supporting a movement, as your personal bank account. That's enriching your family while claiming to fight for working people. That's living in luxury while preaching about economic justice." Johnson pulled out comparative data. "And let me show you the hypocrisy. While you were spending $1,847 on one dinner, the median household income in your district is $67,000 per year. While you were staying in five-star hotels on campaign funds, families in your district struggled to pay rent. While you were flying first class, working people in Minneapolis are taking the bus. The luxury you enjoy on campaign money is beyond what most of your constituents will ever experience in their lifetimes." He gathered the campaign finance documents. "You mocked my Christian background. You dismissed my church experience. But here's what Christians learn about money. It's a trust from God. We're accountable for how we use it. We use it for good, not personal enrichment. We practice what we preach. If we tell others to sacrifice, we sacrifice first. We don't live like the wealthy while attacking the wealthy. We don't enrich our families while preaching about corruption." Johnson's voice carried moral weight. In churches across Louisiana, in churches across America, if a pastor or deacon or treasurer used church funds the way you used campaign funds, they'd be removed immediately. They'd likely be prosecuted. At minimum, they'd be shamed and driven from ministry. Because we take stewardship seriously, because we believe integrity matters, because we believe you should practice what you preach. He looked into the camera. If you believe politicians should be accountable for campaign funds, if you think enriching family members through campaign payments is corruption, if you're tired of people who preach about economic justice while living in luxury, share this. Make sure voters know. Johnson turned back to Omar. "But let's discuss another area where your hypocrisy is glaring. Police funding. Because you championed defunding police while maintaining expensive security for yourself. Let me explain why that violates every Christian principle of justice and equal protection." Johnson's expression became more serious, more intense. This wasn't about legal technicalities or moral teachings anymore. This was about American lives lost because of bad policies. About the fundamental unfairness of someone demanding protection for themselves while stripping it from others. "Congresswoman, you mocked my Christian faith. So, let me speak as a Christian about something we take very seriously: protecting the vulnerable. Psalm 82:3 says, Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Romans 13:4 says, "Government authorities are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer." That includes police protecting citizens from criminals. Let's examine your record on that. He pulled out photos from summer 2020. Protests, riots, Omar marching with activists. Summer 2020. Black Lives Matter protests, calls to defund police, and you were right there at the forefront. Not just tweeting support, actively organizing, marching, demanding that police departments be defunded and dismantled. Let me read some of your statements. Johnson read from a compilation of her tweets and speeches. Defunding police means defunding police. That's you. Direct quote. The Minneapolis Police Department is rotten to the root. We need to dismantle it. Also you. We need to completely reimagine public safety. Your words. Police departments are inherently violent and oppressive institutions. Again, your position. He set down the statements. And some cities listen to you, Congresswoman. Minneapolis, your backyard, voted to dismantle the police department after activists like you championed it. Let me tell you what happened next. Johnson pulled out crime statistics, but presented them as human stories. In 2019, before the defund movement, Minneapolis had 48 murders. In 2020, after the city council voted to defund police, that number jumped to 82. That's 34 additional murders. But these aren't just statistics. These are 34 families destroyed, 34 funerals, 34 lives ended because the police force was gutted and couldn't protect them. He continued, his voice growing more emotional. Carjackings increased 537%. 537%. Violent crime up 22%. Businesses fleeing downtown because it wasn't safe. Response times tripling because there weren't enough officers. The city became a war zone. People were afraid to leave their homes. Small businesses closed. Property values plummeted. And all of this happened because people like you convinced politicians that police were the problem rather than the solution. Johnson pulled out a letter, held it up. This is from Carmen Ramirez. She lives in Minneapolis, not far from your district. On March 15, 2021, her 19-year-old son, Marcus, was walking home from his job at a grocery store. Two men tried to rob him. He had $47 in his pocket, his night's tips from bagging groceries. They shot him for $47. Carmen called 911 at 10:47 p.m. The police arrived at 11:10 p.m., 23 minutes. Johnson's voice was thick with emotion now. Before the budget cuts and the mass exodus of officers, average response time in Carmen's neighborhood was 8 minutes. 8 minutes. If police had arrived in 8 minutes instead of 23, Marcus might still be alive. He might have survived. But he bled out waiting for help that came too late because there weren't enough officers to respond quickly. He looked up from the letter. Carmen wrote to me 6 months ago. She asked me to share Marcus's story. She wants people to know that defund policies have real consequences. She wants people to know that her son died because politicians like you pushed policies that gutted police departments. And you know what the worst part is? You've never called her. You've never acknowledged Marcus. You've never taken any responsibility for the role your advocacy played in his death. Johnson pulled out security expenditure reports. But here's where your hypocrisy reaches truly obscene levels. While you were defunding police for regular people, how much did taxpayers spend protecting you? He read from the documents. Capitol Police Protection when you're in Washington, $387,000 in 2021 alone. NYPD security detail when you visit New York or your district, $120,000 per year. Private security at events, Additional tens of thousands. Total over $500,000 in public money protecting you annually while you champion policies that strip protection from everyone else. Johnson pulled out Capitol Police request logs. And you haven't just passively accepted that protection. You've actively requested additional security 17 times in the past 2 years. For protesters outside your office, for angry social media posts, for online threats. Every time you feel even slightly unsafe, you ask for more police protection. And you get it. His voice rose with righteous indignation. So, let me make absolutely sure I understand this correctly. When you face threats, you get armed police officers. When Carmen Ramirez's son was being murdered, he got a 23-minute response time and a funeral. When you see mean tweets, you get a security detail. When working families in high-crime neighborhoods call 911, they get recordings saying officers aren't available. You get $500,000 in protection. Regular people get defunded police departments and skyrocketing crime. Johnson stood, walked toward her. As a Christian, I believe in equal justice. I believe in equal protection. James 2:9 says, if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. You created a two-tier system, armed security for you, defunded police for everyone else. Protection when you're scared. But working-class people should just reimagine public safety when they're in danger. His voice became passionate, convicted. That's not criminal justice reform. That's not reimagining public safety. That's aristocracy. That's you, living behind walls with armed guards while the people you represent die in the streets. That's you enjoying protection they can't afford while championing policies that took away their protection. Marcus Ramirez paid with his life. You paid nothing. Johnson returned to his seat. Romans 13:4 says, government is God's servant and agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Police serve that function. They protect the innocent and punish the guilty. They respond to 911. They stop violent criminals. They keep communities safe. And you try to dismantle them while keeping your own armed protection. He looked into the camera. If rising crime has affected you or someone you love, if you believe in equal protection under law, if you think Marcus Ramirez deserved the same police response time that protects Ilhan Omar, share this widely. Make sure everyone knows about her hypocrisy. Johnson turned back to Omar, his expression becoming more comprehensive now, preparing for the final reckoning. Congresswoman, we're running out of time, so let me bring everything together. You called me a Christian nationalist who can't understand complex perspectives. So, let me offer you a perspective, a Christian American perspective, on loyalty, faith, and what it means to serve this nation. Johnson stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the center of the hearing room. His demeanor was still calm, still measured, but there was a weight to his presence now. The moral authority of someone who believes deeply, who's thought carefully, who's about to deliver a comprehensive judgment based on faith, law, and love of country. Congresswoman Omar, you began this hearing by mocking my Christian faith and my Louisiana background. You called me a Christian nationalist. You suggested I can't understand complex perspectives because I've never lived outside America. So let me offer you an education from a Christian constitutional lawyer who's spent his entire life studying American law, American history, and American values. He began pacing slowly, organizing his thoughts with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years arguing cases. Let's review what we've learned today, shall we? You possibly committed immigration fraud by marrying your brother or someone else for benefits. You definitely committed tax fraud by filing with one man while married to another. That's documented by Minnesota authorities. You've used anti-Semitic language repeatedly, invoking ancient hatreds that led to the Holocaust. You minimized 9/11 to "some people did something," and can't clearly condemn Islamic terrorism. You told Somali Americans you're Somali and Muslim first, not American. You've enriched yourself and your family through campaign fraud. You championed defund police policies that got people killed while maintaining expensive security for yourself. Johnson stopped pacing, looked directly at her. This isn't a tax. This isn't speculation. This is documented reality from your own statements, public records, and official investigations. This is who you are. This is what you've done. And Americans deserve to know. He pulled out a worn copy of the Constitution, held it reverently. You took an oath when you were sworn into Congress. You placed your hand on a Quran, which is absolutely your right, and I defend that right. And you swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You swore to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America. Do you remember that oath? Johnson opened the Constitution, read from it. Article 6 says that all government officials shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. That oath is sacred. That oath means something. When you swear allegiance to America, you're making a commitment. You're saying that America comes first in your public service. He set down the Constitution, his voice becoming more passionate. But you told Somali Americans you are Somali and Muslim first, not American first. So which is it, Congresswoman? Which oath do you actually believe? The one you took to the U.S. Constitution, or the one you effectively made to your supporters when you told them Somalia and Islam come first? Johnson pulled out her voting record, comprehensive and damning. Let's look at your actions, because actions reveal priorities. You've consistently voted against American defense funding, against supporting our troops, against border security measures, against counterterrorism efforts, against designating terrorist organizations, against supporting Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East, against almost every measure that would strengthen American security or advance American interests. He flipped through pages. But when it comes to Somalia, you're all in. Maximum foreign aid to Somalia with minimal oversight. Preferential treatment for Somali refugees. Expedited processing. Reduced scrutiny. You voted for every measure that benefits Somalia and against almost every measure that benefits America. That's not representing Minneapolis. That's representing Mogadishu. Johnson pulled out records of her foreign travel. And let's look at where you've traveled on other people's money. Somalia, multiple times. Qatar, which funds Hamas. Turkey, which oppresses Kurds and attacks American allies. Pakistan, which harbored Osama bin Laden for years. You've visited countries that are hostile or ambivalent to American interests, countries that oppose American values, countries that harbor or support terrorists. He looked up from the documents. And you know where you've never visited? Israel, our democratic ally. Taiwan, facing existential threats from China. Poland and the Baltic states, worried about Russian aggression. South Korea and Japan, our Asian allies. You've never visited any of our actual allies, only our adversaries and countries with questionable records. That's a choice that reveals priorities. Johnson's voice strengthened with conviction now. The words of someone who genuinely believes he's defending something sacred. You mocked me as a Christian nationalist, so let me tell you what I believe, clearly and without apology. I am a Christian. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. The Bible is God's Word. I try to live according to Christian principles. My faith is the foundation of my life, my values, my worldview. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of it. He picked up his Bible, held it. But you know what my Christian faith teaches me? It teaches me about loyalty, about keeping oaths, about honoring commitments. Colossians 3:23 is, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters." When I serve in Congress, I serve with my whole heart. I serve America. I keep my oath. Johnson's voice became more personal, more impassioned. I'm American through and through. I was born here. I was raised here. I've only ever been American. My ancestors fought in the American Revolution. They fought in the Civil War, in World War I, in World War II. They built this country. They defended this country. They loved this country. And I love this country. I believe America is exceptional. I believe American values, freedom, opportunity, individual liberty, are worth preserving and defending. I believe that despite our flaws and failings, America is the greatest nation in the history of the world. He set down the Bible. I'm Christian first in my personal life. My faith shapes who I am. But I'm American first in my public service. When I vote, I ask what's best for America. When I serve, I ask, how can I help Americans? My loyalty is crystal clear. America first, always. Johnson walked toward Omar, his voice rising with moral authority. But you told Somali Americans you are Somali and Muslim first. You vote against American interests. You visit our adversaries. You minimize our tragedies. You can't condemn those who kill Americans. You enrich yourself through corruption. And when Americans question your loyalty, you claim victimhood and mock us for being Christian and American. He stopped directly in front of her, speaking with the voice of righteous judgment. Congresswoman Omar, you don't deserve to represent Americans in Congress. Not because you're Muslim. I defend religious freedom for everyone. Not because you're an immigrant. America welcomes immigrants who love her. Not because you're a woman, or black, or any other identity characteristic. Those things don't matter to me. What matters is character. What matters is loyalty. What matters is integrity. Johnson's voice filled the room. You don't deserve to serve because you've possibly committed multiple federal crimes. Because you've definitely committed documented fraud. Because you've used hateful language against Jews. Because you've minimized American tragedy. Because you've told your supporters you're not American first. Because you've enriched yourself through corruption. Because you've voted consistently against American interests. Because you've shown through word and deed that your loyalty is divided at best, and more likely primarily lies with Somalia rather than America. He walked back to his seat slowly, his final summation coming. You mocked my Christian faith. You mocked my Louisiana background. You suggested I'm a nationalist who can't understand complexity. So, let me respond to that clearly. Johnson's voice became gentle again, but no less powerful. I am a Christian. I believe that's a good thing. I believe Christian values built Western civilization. I believe Christianity teaches the dignity of every human being, the importance of truth, the necessity of justice, the power of love, and the reality of accountability. I'm not ashamed of being Christian. I'm grateful. He picked up both his Bible and the Constitution. And I am an American nationalist in this sense. I love America. I believe America is exceptional. I believe American values should be preserved. I believe America should put Americans first. If that's nationalism, I plead guilty. But I don't think loving your country and wanting it to succeed is nationalism. I think it's patriotism. I think it's loyalty. I think it's what every member of Congress should feel. Johnson set down both books, looked directly at her with finality. You came to America as a refugee. America saved your life. We took you out of a refugee camp. We gave you safety, education, opportunity. We gave you citizenship. We gave you a seat in Congress. You went from a refugee camp in Kenya to the United States Congress in one generation. That's the American dream. That's only possible in America. And this is how you repay us. His voice rose to its climax, every word carrying weight. By minimizing our tragedies, by telling your supporters you are Somali first, by using anti-Semitic language, by voting against American interests, by enriching yourself through corruption, by mocking Americans who love their faith and their country, by demonstrating through your every action that you're more loyal to Somalia than to the nation that saved your life. Johnson gathered his papers, closed his folder with finality. Congresswoman, I'm a Christian. I believe in forgiveness. I believe in redemption. I believe God can change hearts. So, I'll say this. It's not too late. You can change. You can start being honest. You can start putting America first. You can start living with integrity. You can repent. That's a Christian word meaning to turn around, to change direction. You can become the representative your constituents deserve. He stood, prepared to leave, but delivered his final words. But until you do, you should not serve in Congress. You should not represent Americans when you've said you're Somali first. You should not lecture others about values when you've violated every principle of honesty and integrity. And you should not mock Christian Americans who love their faith and their country. Because, Congresswoman, at the end of the day, this Christian nationalist from Louisiana understands something you apparently don't. Loyalty matters. Truth matters. Integrity matters. And America deserves better than you. Johnson picked up his Bible and his Constitution, held them both. God bless America, and may God have mercy on your soul. The hearing room was absolutely silent. Omar sat frozen, her defiant expression from the beginning completely shattered. She'd walked in confident, ready to defend her progressive positions, prepared to attack her critics. She'd mocked Mike Johnson, thinking he was an easy target, a religious guy from Louisiana who'd be easy to dismiss as unsophisticated. Instead, she'd been systematically dismantled with nothing but documented facts, moral authority, and the conviction of someone who genuinely believes in the principles he articulates. Every aspect of her record examined. Every defense destroyed with evidence. Every attempt at playing the victim demolished with reality. The moderator tried to give her a chance to respond. Congresswoman Omar, would you like to address the speaker's statements? She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing coherent emerged. She shuffled through notes frantically. But what could she say? Everything Johnson presented was documented. Her own words, her own votes, her own financial records, official investigations, professional translations. All verified, all sourced, all undeniable. This is clearly an attack based on... She started, but couldn't finish. Based on what? Islamophobia? He'd presented her own statements and public records. Racism? He'd focused entirely on her actions and documented violations. Religious persecution? He'd defended her right to be Muslim while questioning her documented behavior. Congresswoman, Johnson said quietly, not unkindly. "I've presented evidence from official sources. I've quoted your own words. I've cited findings from your own party's ethics committee. I've referenced documented facts. If you want to claim persecution, you'll need to refute the evidence. Can you do that?" Silence. She gathered her papers with shaking hands and left the hearing room. No triumphant exit, no defiant statement, just a quiet retreat, while cameras captured every moment of her departure. Within minutes, social media exploded. Faith and fraud began trending. Then, Christian nationalism, but not in the way Omar intended. Christians across America were sharing clips of Johnson's testimony with pride, saying, "Yes, this is what Christian nationalism actually means: loving God, loving country, defending truth." The video reached 25 million views in 2 hours, 89 million by the end of the day, 156 million within 48 hours. It became the most watched congressional hearing in C-SPAN history, surpassing even Watergate. Conservative Christians rallied. Evangelicals shared it with their congregations. Catholics posted it on parish bulletins. Mainline Protestants, who'd never been particularly political, found themselves moved by Johnson's moral clarity and defense of faith. But more significantly, moderate Democrats were troubled. The evidence was overwhelming. The hypocrisy was undeniable. The divided loyalty was obvious. Even progressives, who usually defended Omar, struggled to find a response to documented facts presented with such moral authority. The next morning, a moderate Democrat named Ibrahim Hassan announced a primary challenge. Hassan was a Somali American, a successful small business owner, a father of 3. His announcement speech was simple and powerful. "I love Somalia. It's where I was born, it's where my ancestors are from. But I love America more. America saved my family. America gave us opportunity. America made my success possible. I'm American first, and Minnesota's 5th District deserves a representative who is also American first." Within the first week, Hassan raised $4.5 million. Donations poured in from across the country, from Republicans who'd never vote for a Democrat but wanted Omar gone, from moderate Democrats embarrassed by her extremism, from Jewish Americans exhausted by her anti-Semitism, from Christians moved by Johnson's testimony, from police families angry about defund policies, from 9/11 families who could never forgive some people did something. The polling was catastrophic for Omar. Her approval rating in her district dropped 41 points in 2 weeks. Her unfavorable rating hit 68%. Even in heavily Somali precincts, Hassan was competitive. Many Somali Americans were embarrassed by Omar's behavior and grateful for the opportunities America had provided them. Squad members began distancing themselves. AOC made vague statements about differing perspectives within the progressive movement. Rashida Tlaib suddenly became very focused on local Michigan issues. Ayanna Pressley had scheduling conflicts when asked about campaigning with Omar. Democratic leadership, privately relieved, moved swiftly. They stripped Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee, citing a need for members who demonstrate clear loyalty to American interests and haven't used anti-Semitic language. They opened multiple investigations into her campaign finances. They made clear that she was on her own. The speaker's lesson, as it became known, was studied in seminaries as an example of Christian witness in the public square. It was taught in law schools as a masterclass in presenting evidence. It was analyzed in political science courses as a case study in moral authority defeating identity politics. 18 months after the hearing, Ilhan Omar lost her primary to Ibrahim Hassan by 34 points. It wasn't close. Her district had seen enough. They wanted someone who understood that being American meant being American first, regardless of where you were born. They wanted someone who wouldn't use anti-Semitic language, wouldn't minimize 9/11, wouldn't enrich family through campaign funds, wouldn't mock people's faith. Omar is no longer in Congress. She does occasional commentary for fringe progressive outlets, but her audience shrinks monthly. Multiple investigations into her conduct are ongoing. She's become a cautionary tale about divided loyalty and moral bankruptcy. And Mike Johnson? He's still Speaker, still a devout Christian, still soft-spoken, still from Louisiana, still carrying his Bible to hearings. His moral authority was enhanced not by attacking Omar personally, but by presenting documented truth with Christian conviction and love of country. The hearing is still discussed, still shared, still referenced whenever someone questions whether faith and patriotism belong in public life. It taught America that Christian values aren't weakness, but strength. That loving your country isn't nationalism, but loyalty. And that sometimes the most powerful response to mockery is simply presenting truth with grace, conviction, and absolute moral clarity. It took 12 words for Ilhan Omar to make a fatal mistake. Christian nationalist from Louisiana who can't understand complex perspectives. 12 words that revealed everything about how she views America. A place where Christian faith is something to mock. Where loving your country is nationalism. Where being from the South is a mark of ignorance. Where loyalty to America is unsophisticated. 12 words that woke up someone she should never have underestimated. What followed was 2 hours of the most comprehensive, morally authoritative political accountability in modern congressional history. Not through shouting, not through personal attacks, through documentation, through her own words, through official investigations, through moral principles, through love of God and country. Mike Johnson didn't destroy Ilhan Omar's career that day. She'd built the foundation for its destruction through years of potential crimes, documented fraud, anti-Semitic hatred, divided loyalty, and moral hypocrisy. Johnson just organized the evidence, presented it clearly, and spoke truth from a foundation of Christian conviction and American patriotism. Because the facts were overwhelming. The marriage fraud, the tax fraud, the anti-Semitism, the 9/11 minimization, the Somali First statement, the campaign corruption, the defund hypocrisy, the voting record against American interests, all documented, all verified, all undeniable. But more than the specific facts, Johnson taught a broader lesson. He reminded America that Christian faith belongs in public life, that loving your country isn't nationalism, it's patriotism, that loyalty to America should be the bare minimum for serving in Congress. That accountability matters, that truth matters, that character matters. He reminded us that you can be deeply religious and deeply patriotic at the same time. That faith makes you a better citizen, not a worse one. That Christian values built this nation and sustain it still. That there's no contradiction between loving God and loving America. In fact, they go together perfectly. And he reminded us never to underestimate someone based on their faith, their accent, or where they're from. The soft-spoken Christian from Louisiana turned out to be exactly who was needed to speak truth with moral authority, to defend both faith and nation, to hold accountable someone who'd violated principles of honesty, integrity, and loyalty. It took 12 words to start it. Christian nationalist from Louisiana who can't understand complex perspectives. And it took 2 hours of documented truth, moral clarity, and Christian conviction to end it. The faith and the fraud, the believer and the hypocrite, the patriot and the divided loyalist, the Christian from Louisiana and the refugee who forgot gratitude. And America saw clearly which one deserved to serve. If you're a Christian who believes faith matters, if you're an American who believes loyalty matters, if you think serving in Congress requires putting America first, if you believe accountability and truth still matter, share this story everywhere. Share it in your churches. Share it with your families. Share it with everyone who's ever been mocked for their faith or their patriotism. Share it with everyone who believes Christian values built this nation and are worth defending. Because this is what happens when someone mocks Christian faith and American patriotism and discovers that those values include accountability, truth, integrity, and loyalty. This is what happens when divided loyalty meets wholehearted patriotism. This is what happens when someone underestimates a Christian constitutional lawyer from Louisiana. Mike Johnson didn't just defeat Ilhan Omar that day. He reminded America that our faith is our strength, our patriotism is our pride, and our values are worth defending. He reminded us that Christian nationalism, properly understood as loving God and country, defending truth and justice, serving with integrity and loyalty, is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be proud of. And he reminded us that sometimes the most powerful weapon against fraud, hypocrisy, and divided loyalty is simply the truth, spoken with conviction, grounded in faith, and delivered with love for the country that gave us everything. That's not just politics. That's righteousness. And it's beautiful. God bless Mike Johnson. God bless America. And may God have mercy on those who mock the faith that built this nation.